Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with our feature, Jeb Stuart Magruder, who died at the age of 79. He was a major player in the Watergate scandal. He went to jail for 7 months. And to understand the Watergate scandal, it helps to understand the story of Jeb Stuart Magruder. He joined the Nixon White House in 1969, and he became the second in command of the Committee to Reelect the President, CREEP, in 1972. The problem was that his boss there was John Mitchell, who was also the Attorney General. So you had the number one law enforcement officer in the United States responsible for the re-election of the president, and some nefarious characters led by G. Gordon Liddy, a former FBI agent, were brought in to do dirty tricks against the Democrats, most notably a break-in at the Democratic National Headquarters, the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C., to get the files on Larry O'Brien, who was the Democratic National Chairman. Magruder sat in on all this, and he was torn between not breaking the law and re-electing Richard Nixon. Here's a report on Jeb Stuart Magruder and some of the footage from the Watergate hearings.
Jeb Magruder was second in command on the committee to re-elect the president.
To all of us who had worked in the White House, there was that feeling of resentment and of frustration at being able to deal with issues on a legal basis.
There are countless cliches that come to mind that I could use to try to describe that state of mind or that attitude, fighting fire with fire, two wrongs don't make a right, and all the rest, but they all seem inadequate.
Well, they certainly were, and I have no justification for them, nor will I make any today. I fully accept the responsibility of having made an absolute disastrous decision, or at least participated. I didn't make the decision, but certainly participated in it.
A decision, really, that is going to affect history that was made in almost a casual way.
Yes, sir.
According to testimony of Dean, Magruder, and others, White House planning for illegal operations had been going on for a long time. Gordon Liddy moved from the White House plumbers to the committee to re-elect the president. There he proposed an extraordinary plan in various forms for approval by the head of the committee, John Mitchell.
I met Magruder and Liddy at Mitchell's office. Liddy had a series of charts or diagrams which he placed on an easel, and the presentation by Liddy began.
There was, of course, the projects including wiretapping, electronic surveillance, and photography. There were projects relating to the abduction of individuals, particularly members of radical groups. We were concerned about the convention in San Diego. Mr. Liddy had a plan where the leaders would be abducted and detained in a place like Mexico, and that they would then be returned to this country at the end of the convention. He had another plan which would have used women as agents to work with members of the Democratic National Committee. He envisioned renting a yacht in Miami and having it set up for sound and photographs. I think you could consider them call girls.
Dean was testifying that he had blown the whistle on a conspiracy going on inside the Justice Department, right in the office of the Attorney General, the highest legal officer in the government. John Mitchell was not only Attorney General, the guardian of the laws, he also happened to be Richard Nixon's man, the campaign director who masterminded the Nixon election. He was devoted to the president's interests, personal and political. If responsibility for the break-in extended as high as John Mitchell, it would be reaching perilously close to the White House and to the president himself. Mitchell denied under oath that he had approved any version of the plan, but his former deputy, Magruder, had already testified under oath that Mitchell had.
You say Mr. Mitchell signed off on it. Do you mean physically initialed it or
No,
signed
sir.
it?
I mean, said, we'll give Mr. Liddy the $250,000.
And he identified the targets. Did that include the Democratic National Committee headquarters
Yes,
at the Watergate?
Yes, sir.
Did he do that with a pencil?
He may have. He wrote some things on the documents. I cannot specifically recall what he wrote on the documents because I destroyed the documents.
But is there any doubt in your mind that the plan was agreed to by Mr. Mitchell?
No, sir. There was no doubt.
Did you ever tell Mr. Mitchell before you made your full truthful disclosure that you were going to have to tell the truth?
Yes, sir.
And what was his response?
He indicated to me that he would not be able to go that way and that he would have to go the other way. And I said, I understood. And he said he understood my position. And he wished me luck and I wished him luck.
Gordon Liddy was a pretty weird guy. Here Magruder talks about his first encounter with him.
Gordon Liddy was the burglar patriot who refused to talk, who once practiced self-discipline by eating a rat, and who gave some pause to those for whom he worked.
I simply put my hand on Mr. Liddy's shoulder, and he asked me to remove it and indicated that if I didn't, serious consequences could occur.
Was he more specific than serious consequences?
Well, he indicated he would kill me, but I want to make it clear that I don't regard that, and I do not now regard that as a specific threat. It was simply Mr. Liddy's mannerism.
Here's a further explanation by the Watergate investigators and Daniel Shore of how Magruder fit into the conspiracy.
The way the conspiracy appeared to us to be shaping up with Liddy at the top based on the evidence we had, if it went higher, and we didn't know whether it went higher, the logical person based both on position and responsibilities would have been Jeb Magruder.
Magruder, as deputy campaign chief, had to explain away nearly $100,000 that Liddy used for Watergate. Magruder concocted a story that the money was budgeted for campaign security, but that Liddy, all on his own, decided to spend it on a break-in.
Now, what I had to do was, number one, I had to go to the prosecutors and tell that story and make that believable, but number two, I had to have somebody to back it up.
Bart is Bart Porter, Magruder's assistant.
Well, I pitched it to Bart basically on the basis that I needed his help, that we were in a quandary, that this guy Liddy had gone off on his own, had done these things that had really created problems, but we had to have some way to justify giving him the money.
Magruder asked Porter to corroborate the story of a meeting at which Liddy's $100,000 budget was supposedly approved.
Basically, the bottom line was, if anybody asks you, if anybody asks you, whether it was an attorney or whoever, anybody asks you, it would be helpful if you could remember a number like around $100,000 that we discussed. My big error, of course, was that I said, yeah, I would do that.
They would have to testify under oath before the Watergate grand jury. If the prosecutors and the jurors didn't swallow their story, Magruder would be charged. Inevitably, he would drag Nixon's top aides down with him.
We were all aware that I was going to go up and perjure myself, and that was the way the cover-up was going to work. You go up and you testify to why we spent the money with Liddy, and then you bring Porter in and he backs up your story. We were not 5-year-olds.
Magruder took his oath and told his lies.
Well, as I said, he ultimately went to jail for 7 months, became a Presbyterian minister, and at the end of his life, he reflected on his errors.
Larry was not our friend. Get information on Larry O'Brien. Liddy had already proposed the plan, so it wasn't a question of sort of yes or no. There was a plan. Liddy had said $1 million that if didn't follow Haldeman Ehrlichman directives, you were gone. I don't think I thought that was very important. In retrospect, that was a moral disaster, but at the time it didn't seem important. The break-in seemed somewhat innocuous in the context of what was going on at that time. It was the war, there was all this hassle going on.
Like our podcast on Roger Beaujolais, Jeb Stuart Magruder is a wonderful study in career ethics. We're going to move on now to Clyde Snow, who died recently at the age of 86. He was the premier forensic anthropologist in the world. He studied bones, teeth, everything related to how and when people die. He examined everything from King Tut to Josef Mengele. This show has a finest form because he testified in the House Committee in 1978 in the Kennedy assassination that yes, the man in the picture with the gun is Lee Harvey Oswald. He played a critical role in investigating the desaparecidos in Argentina, and his work is a critical historical reference and documentation of that infamy. He was also involved in 2 Chicago cases, the John Wayne Gacy serial killings where he examined victims, and the American Airlines Flight 191 airplane disaster 1979, where 271 people died. He worked out of the University of Oklahoma, was involved with the Oklahoma City bombings and the Tulsa race riot examination of 1921. And here's Oklahoma Television on Clyde Snow talking about perhaps his most notable case.
Dr. Clyde Snow has seen what the worst violence in the world has left behind. He's traveled the globe listening to bones, identifying human remains, solving mass murders, and bringing war criminals to justice. His career has been devoted to giving identity to the dead and advancing the cause of social justice. A few years ago, it took him to a high-profile trial in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was accused of exterminating about 180,000 Kurds in the late 1980s. When you testified in his trial, he challenged your finding.
Saddam, I think this was almost 2 hours into the trial. By the way, it's the longer than I've ever been on the stand in my life, because the whole thing lasted about 4 hours, as I recall. You have to stand the witness does not sit. A lot of the time was spent with lawyers yelling at each other and the judges yelling at the judges yelling back, the defendants yelling at everybody. And so I would say a few words and then off it'd go again. But Saddam did get up and ask me a question, which unfortunately I was not able to answer. Didn't have the opportunity of answering. But he got up and his preamble was that he had never heard of me, which made sense. He didn't know who I was and what I was doing there. I could be working with, I believe he mentioned the CIA. I could listen to this because very good simultaneous translation. Then he got into, and he made the statement. He said, Iraq is full of mass graves. How do we know that this grave that this person says he dug up couldn't have been Hittites that lived 5,000 years ago? And I was just dying, because what I was going to tell him was I knew that Hittites had a very advanced civilization, but I didn't know it was so advanced that they had digital wristwatches. And I would have found it even more puzzling that all of them were stopped short or maybe a few days after August 28, 1988, the date that this massacre occurred. But the judges broke in at that point and said, more or less, asked and answered, because your own lawyers, Mr. Hussein, have already qualified Dr. Snow as an expert. So please sit down. So he sat down, and it was quite an interesting experience.
Clyde Snow was quite an interesting man. We're going to close tonight with Nancy Malone, who died recently at the age of 79. She was an actress and became a television director. She started acting when she was 7. She was on Broadway and in commercials. At 10 years old, she was named Life's Typical American Girl for their 10th anniversary issue. She went on to co-star in Naked City in the early 50s. That was one of the first television dramas. They didn't let women have starring roles then, and she chafed about that. After that, she did a lot of interesting guest starring roles on television for the next 15 years before becoming a director and an advocate for women in Hollywood. I'm going to play a snip from one of those roles. It's from a 1964 episode of The Twilight Zone. It's called Stopover in a Quiet Town. She starred with Barry Nelson as a couple who went to a party and had too much to drink and woke up in a very strange environment. It's a minor classic.
Bob, where are we?
I had hoped we were in the bedroom of an apartment on West 12th Street in New York City.
Well, we're not.
I don't get it. We went to sleep at home, didn't we?
Well, of course we did. I mean, remember, we left the party up in Bedford Village.
And you drove.
I had to. Remember, you were,
sleepy.
Let's just say unable to drive. You even had the top down. I thought that would revive you. And then somewhere above Riverdale.
Well, somewhere above Riverdale. What?
Wait a minute. Something came down on the car from overhead. A shadow. And then, that's all I remember. Well, it's a good thing I don't believe in ghosts.
Oh, neither do I, but let's get out of here anyway.
Bob and Millie Frazier, average young New Yorkers who attended a party in the country last night and on the way home took a detour. Most of us on waking in the morning know exactly where we are. The rooster or the alarm clock brings us out of sleep into the familiar sights, sounds, aromas of home and the comfort of a routine day ahead. Not so with our young friends. This will be a day like none they've ever spent, and they'll spend it in the Twilight Zone.
I'm not going to tell you where they wound up. You have to catch that for yourself. I want to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. I said Nancy Malone starred in 2 memorable television episodes. The other one was right around the same time. She starred with Nick Adams in The Outer Limits in an episode called Fun and Games. Catch it. It's a fascinating episode, and we're going to close tonight with a song called Out of Limits by the Marquettes. It's a surf rocker that went to number 3 right around the same time as Nancy Malone was starring in these, but they had to change the name of the song from Outer Limits to Out of Limits. I think you'll like it.